Let's talk carbohydrates. The one thing we always villainize.
Oh, snap.
Let's be blunt. Carbs don't make you fat. Fat doesn't make you fat. Protein doesn't make you fat. It's the overconsumption of energy that makes you fat. Now on that topic, let's touch on carbohydrates. What are carbohydrates? Carbohydrates are foods that basically get converted into glucose. Carbohydrates make up fructose, glucose, galactose. Understanding the whole science of what a carb is for most of us irrelevant. However, it's easy to villainize carbs as making us fat. I'm not saying carbs can't lead us to weight gain.
You are getting fat.
But I want us to start thinking of carbs rather on a spectrum of better carbs to the worst carbs. Now, on the topic of carbs making us fat, what do we think of when we say carbs? Pastas, pizzas, muffin, cookies, cakes. And yes, those are highly processed carb sources, but they actually have another addition to it, fat. If you take a pizza, most of the energy isn't actually the carbs, it's the fat from the cheese and the bacon and the salamis and the hams. Okay, what about a muffin?
Muffins!
Have you ever tried to bake a muffin without oil or butter in a recipe? I have. It is horrible. You can actually kill somebody with it, how dense, how dry, and how it tastes of sadness. But that's the thing. It's the fat quantity that makes it easier to overeat. What about pasta? Do you overeat on pasta? Not really. If you have a bowl of pasta, what do we put on top? The cheese sauces, the butter sauces, the bacon, the salamis. Again, high in energy. To unpack the energy thing a bit more, 1 gram of carbohydrates is around 4 calories or 16 kilojoules. 1 gram of fat is 9 calories, 36 kilojoules. That's a big jump. But also keeping in mind now, carbs can still hold moisture. A medium large boiled potato is 100 grams. That's only 80 calories. That potato has around 20 grams of carbohydrates. So what's the other 80 grams? Moisture. A potato isn't dry. But what happens if I try to take oil and I mix water in it? They don't mix. So 2 teaspoons of oil. I don't care what oil it is now, any form of cooking oil. That's 90 calories. 2 teaspoons, 10 milliliters. Compared to a potato, that's a massive difference. But these 2 teaspoons have more energy than the potato. So I'm not villainizing fat, but I'm also saying a lot of times we blame carbs as making us fat, but we forget those carbs we blame, how much of the fat is added to them. That's even where it gets more devilish. When you take fat and sugar, or fat and salt, and you combine those 2 things, it's what we call the bliss point of food. It's very difficult to stop eating it. I'm going to give you 4 boiled potatoes to start eating on. 400 grams of potatoes. That is around, say, 320 calories. Let's even round it off, say 400 calories of boiled potatoes. Halfway through that, maybe on the second potato, you're going to tell me, it's like, you know what? That's enough. I don't want any more. That's what we call palate fatigue. We get to a point, you know what? I've had enough. I don't want any more. Now let's take a large McDonald's shoestring fries. One of my guilty pleasures. I love those. That large is also around 400 calories. But how quickly do you finish that? Instantly. So energy-wise, they're exactly the same. Volume-wise, definitely not. But once you finish that McDonald's French fries, how do you feel afterwards? You want more. Why? Because fat, salt. Add another one, crispiness. And we add a whole new level of we can't stop. Foods are designed so we can't stop eating them. Okay, what about sugar? Sugar is a carb. Literally, that's the main thing of sugar, is being a carbohydrate. Glucose and fructose combined. Do you overeat on sugar? If you take a bowl of sugar and start eating it, 2-3 teaspoons later, it kind of gets horrible. You don't want it anymore. But now let's add some butter to that and cream that together. Now we get the basis of what? Most baked goods, most cookies. Because now we've got the sugar and the fat combined. How easy do we overeat now? We can't stop. So a lot of times when we villainize carbs, think about it. Those carbs you constantly overeat on, do they have fat and salt combined with that carb? Or that carb, does it have sugar and fat combined with it? Most of the times we overeat carbs because they are combined with fat and salt or fat and sugar.
Donuts, donuts, donuts.
That's where it's very easy to overconsume. But also, when we make those kinds of foods, we use highly processed carbs. In other words, flour bases. Flour is dry, it's dense. It nearly has 4 calories per gram. So it's easy to add more calories, which leads us to overconsumption of energy, which leads to fat. What are the better sources of carbs then? When it comes to carbs, I don't want to cut carbs too low. If we cut our carbs too low, it's easy to feel more lethargic, less energy, and just more cranky and more cravings, especially if we also exercise. Carbs are vitally important because carbs is our main form of energy. Protein does its own thing. Fats does its own thing. Carbs is energy. That's what the body wants to use. But now, let's put that on a spectrum. If I had to say what are the best carb sources, hands down, all forms of legumes. That's tier 1, the best sources. Chickpeas, lentils, mung beans, garbanzo beans, black-eyed peas, not the band, but the pea itself. And the list goes on. However, on beans, we have to touch on this topic of weapons of mass destruction. If I eat beans, I fart, the whole house gets emptied. Yes, for a lot of us, that shows we don't have enough of the bacteria to digest the fiber. Beans are very high in fiber. So now, usually when we are very gassy or a bit of bloated when we consume beans, the thing is to keep in mind here, that's actually a sign we don't have enough of the bacteria to digest and break these down. Think of fermentation. That fiber is now in your digestive tract. The longer it's there, the more it starts fermenting. Fermentation creates gas. Same if you leave fruit juice outside. The bottle's going to start swelling up because it's fermenting. Now, I'm not saying then stop eating beans. In contrary, we need to keep eating beans. But this is where we need to ramp it up. Maybe go for 1 portion of beans every 2 days. Then 1 portion of beans every day. And then, if you really want to make sure you are healthy, adequate fiber, 1 or 2 portions of beans per day is one of the best sources of carbs we can consume. High in fiber, high in protein, and very good carb source. Also very slow digesting, which leads to more satiation and less hunger cravings. Now, the second tier on the carbs are whole grains, like amaranth, buckwheat, spelt, whole grains. Think of the whole grain. If you can see it, that is a whole grain. There's also many options of that. One down is our tubers, potatoes and sweet potatoes. Still very good. Even a butternut we can always put there. Then one down is whole grain flour sources. Things like whole wheat pastas, brown rice. Just on the topic of rice, rice is a big staple for me. I eat rice every day at least. I lived in Asia for 10 years, so it's a staple. It's not bad, but we still need to ensure the foods we add with our rice compensates for the quick digesting nature of rice. Whole brown rice is still a better option than white, but I just personally prefer white. Then, around the 7th level of that tier, there is no 5 and 6, is our white flour products. If you take these white flour products, the main thing is of these carbs where the problem comes in. They are void of all fiber. They are very high in energy per gram, but also they digest very quickly. The problem with the quick digestion, they digest quickly.
My blood sugar spikes.
Blood glucose goes up very quickly. As I said, carbs eventually become glucose. That happens very quickly. That spike goes up, insulin goes up, what comes up must go down, and then the hunger pangs. I can eat my friend next to me at 10 o'clock. I suddenly want cravings. I want something quick fix. Yes, because that blood glucose also dipped. We want to bring back our blood glucose. That's where these highly processed carb sources become a problem. They're high in energy per gram. They digest very quickly, leading to blood glucose spikes with insulin. We ride that roller coaster. Over time, insulin sensitivity. Over time, diabetes. So yes, that's where carbs can be problematic, especially with the addition of sugar and fat or salt and fat. And most processed carbs have all those in common. So it's not about eliminating carbs. It's about making smarter carb choices. What are they? Focus on legumes, whole grains, tubers, and then whole grain processed carb sources. But still keep in mind, you can still take those and make them so you can overeat on them, especially if you add a lot of fat to them and salt, or if you add a lot of sugar and fat to them. It still leads to overconsumption due to the bliss point of food. So take the next week or two, start looking at your carb sources. What's making up the bulk of that carb sources? And you know what? Then we just start replacing instead of eliminating those white carbs. What if we say 3 days of the week, I have no white carbs, I rather have legumes or whole grains? Okay, perfect. Then that can eventually become 4 days a week, 5 days a week. And you know what? I still enjoy my white stuff. I still enjoy my wholly processed things, a treat every now and then. I don't take those off the table, but I need to earn them. And how do I earn them? To ensure 80% of the time, my carb sources are unprocessed, high in fiber, high in moisture content, which means lower in energy, more satiation, and less blood glucose spikes. Don't overcomplicate it. If you can see that carb source, how it is in nature in its whole form, you know you're on the right track. How do you cook them? However you like. Boiling them, poaching them, mashing them. Even for me, I like taking mashed potatoes and beans. I mix those up where I mash the beans and potatoes together. I'm just now adding more fiber to my mashed potatoes. Get creative, experiment, try new things. But just ensure the carbs you choose, high fiber, high moisture content, and addition of protein, you are on the right path. Stop overcomplicating carbs and stop villainizing carbs as the leading source of all your problems. Those highly processed carbs with the addition of fat and the addition of salt or sugar leads to the bliss point of food, and we overeat. Start cutting out those and replacing them with the better sources, and you'll be surprised actually how satiated and how energized you feel. I'm going to ask you a favor today. If you enjoyed this video and you learned something, please give it a thumbs up or a subscribe. That will ensure I see I made one person's day better today, which makes it more fulfilling for me to do these videos because I'm really passionate about sharing this message, helping you unravel this whole shit show of what I call the whole world of nutrition and diet, because it's like the wild, wild west. There's so many contradictory information. You can't do this, you can't do that. You know what? Let's stop overcomplicating this. And this is the message I want to share more with you guys. So in return, I would really appreciate a thumbs up or a subscribe. And until our next one. And remember, be better today than you were yesterday.